Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. I know we were gone last Sunday, and we have a lot to talk about, as this is the Sunday before Election Day. We have the results of election early voting turnout. And what does that mean in Texas? What does that mean in Tarrant? We'll be talking about that. As usual, we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses, and we do this for you every week. The podcast of the year in Fort Worth. And I'm with the Ann Zeta. What's going on?
I'm a little overwhelmed with everything that we had to kind of muck through to get ready for this. When we skip a week, we send each other articles just like every day, and we end up with a pile of articles. And then we have to kind of like suss out what it is we're going to focus on. And so our prep for this was a little longer and more challenging than it sometimes is.
And it's, I don't know how you guys are feeling about the election and just the amount of things you're getting. So the other challenge part is like there was actual some real news going on and some really great stories outside of the election being published and talked about in the newspaper. So we're going to navigate housing. We're going to navigate transportation. The big story will be kind of election, our analysis, our thoughts and feelings. Really, we hope this just can be, maybe for all of us, just kind of a therapy session on the election, what we're going through, what we're managing, worst case scenarios, possibilities, things that give us hope, things that give us concerns. But we first just kind of want to dive into basic level voting data. And so obviously we are seeing that Texas early votes casted between 2020 and 2024 are down. 9.7 million people early voted in 2020, where 8.8 million voted in 2024. You're looking at roughly it's 825,000 votes is the gap that will need to be filled on Election Day, which is November 5th. Now, a couple important things that need to be in consideration here that I think people are not taking into consideration. Early voting in 2020 had an additional 6 days. So that's a big piece too. Mail-in ballots were also higher in 2020 compared to now. And so we were also going through a pandemic. So realize those extra days, people wanting to create space. So hopefully what we see is a stronger Tuesday. That's really going to be a big piece.
Yeah, I think I got into a couple of disagreements with people because there was so much chatter about all these people who were excited to early vote that when somebody said to me, oh, but I hear the numbers are down between 2020 and 2024, I was like, that can't be right. But then as we dug into those specific things, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, and I think the gist of the story that we're going to talk about is like the data between like Tarrant, and I think for me, the big story I have, and maybe even the title for this is Tarrant. We're going to see Tarrant County's true colors this election. I don't know what it's going to be, but what we do know is Tarrant County's registered voters who voted. You have to understand, we had more people vote in person in early election than Dallas County. So we were only 1,000 votes roughly behind Dallas County. Over 50% of our registered voters voted early compared to 44.9% of Dallas County voters. And so we're coming out to vote, Tarrant County. When you compare us to Harris County, 45.6%. When you look at Bear, 46.5%. Travis County had 52%. Austin. Collin County had 58%. There's some things around here where I'm nervous about, but we'll talk more about that in the big story. I want you to go ahead and touch, Ando, what are some things we should probably need to know for these upcoming elections, as we do have to get people out still on Tuesday.
So there is a Star Telegram article called Election Day in Tarrant County, What to Know, What to Watch For, and When We'll Get Results. And this really does break down going back to the basics. So those of you who didn't do all of your research in preparation for early voting still have an opportunity to be prepared on Election Day. because this story breaks it down of who's on the ballot in Tarrant County. The most well-known race for sure is the presidential election, but there are down ballot races that everybody needs to be aware of as well. Um, the this article breaks down kind of that presidential election and kind of the two candidates and what they've been pushing in swing states, because pretty much all of the focus is on those swing states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. If you know people in those states, encourage them to go vote on election day, because I'm not sure what is good. I'm not trying to discourage people from voting in Texas and in states that maybe aren't swing states, because I think everyone should vote. But I think that's mainly where everybody has their focus on in the presidential election. But there is also a U.S. Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred. And so that will be on your ballot as well.
Which they were in Tarrant County recently.
Right. I think both of them have been campaigning here. Other races include U.S. Representative Kay Granger is retiring and not running again, so that was an open seat. There are two candidates up for sheriff, the incumbent and a challenger. And you can learn more about that in the Star-Telegram voter guide, which is included in this article as well. So I think we've talked about many of those races, but then there's a bunch of judge races, and many of those don't have opponents. I tend to do my research, and if I know the person, then I can support them. But if I don't have any knowledge, then I can skip those. But I don't just skip down ballot. I educate and inform myself as much as I possibly can, because when somebody goes to the trouble of putting their name on a ballot, I think it's nice to acknowledge that with a vote either for or against them. So like I said, there is a voter guide in this Star-Telegram article that people can look at. And the other thing is, there were some long lines during early voting. There's the website on the Tarrant County webpage that shows the wait times. Those wait times are dependent on poll workers reporting that information. So don't get discouraged if you see a wait time on there and then you show up and it's longer than you thought. I have a friend who voted on the last day of early voting. She showed up at 6 o'clock when the polls were closing at 7. There was a line around the building. There was a lack of parking. I mean, like, all the parking that was available was full. She got in line. She stayed in line. She ended up voting and everything was fine. She was voting at the Tarrant County Elections Office's location, and there were two lines there that she was found a little confusing. She wasn't sure what that meant, but I think I described it to her as that there are people who maybe don't have their address correct on their material, and so there are ways to fill out a form that explains what your hardship is with your address not being updated or your ID not being correct, that you can get in one line for that and another line for the other. And the best location to go do that is at the election offices, because the people who other polling locations have to call into are at that location.
Yeah, and I imagine, though, if you listen to this pod, you have already voted. But
if you haven't, you are not off the hook. You had better get out there on election day, and I don't care how long the lines are. There will be more polling locations on election day.
Yeah.
There were 51, 52 in early voting. On election day, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's in the hundreds of of places that you can go vote.
So what really, honestly, is like, remember about, we need to be extreme voters. Those are people who we vote, we go get someone else to vote. So those are like go get one other person to make sure they're voting. That stepbrother, that your kid's friend who, seems to have opinions but hasn't really done anything. Always look at who we can get to go out on Tuesday to make this happen. So let's go ahead and dive into, we're going to come back to this in our big story and give you guys some more. But we got a lot of real Fort Worth storytelling around things we need, around transportation. I would argue that what we're about to go through is Fort Worth Magazine's best story I've read since I was reading news of Fort Worth. So shout out Brian Kendall. But our great co-host, Ann Zeta, was also involved in the story as well. It's Who Killed the Streetcar, the state of Fort Worth's public transit. When it comes to public transit, Fort Worth is getting left in the rear view, and we better catch up before it's too late. And tell me, I mean, obviously you know a lot of people on this article. You were a part of this article, but man, tell me more about what we have here.
Well, I think the thing that jumped out at me that I found, I hope motivates other people, is this article starts off describing Fort Worth as possibly being a suburb of Dallas. And that this quote comes from Jeff Davis, who is the chair of Trinity Metro Board. But this is something that Fort Worthians chafe against to the extreme. They do not like to be called a suburb of Dallas. They don't like to be compared to Dallas. They don't want anybody saying anything in Fort Worth is like Dallas. And so the article starts off with that comparison and then ends with some quotes from Chuck Marone, who heads up Strong Towns, saying that if we're not careful in Fort Worth and don't look at other ways of getting around our city in a more multimodal way, and we continue to depend on cars, as everybody loves to hear me talk about, we will end up like California.
Yeah.
So if this article doesn't motivate you to do something, I don't know what will.
And what's the reason why it said we're going to move to California? Because this is a big article. I mean, it took me 20 minutes to read, and I had to run through it. But why California? There was a lot of history on here. Why was
I think it's California cities that didn't do enough around public transportation and continued to depend on building roads, widening roads, and not having a robust multimodal system. He says, no matter how you slice it, Fort Worth is either 20 years away from catching up or 20 years away from becoming California. Hopefully, at least we can get out from under the thumb of Dallas suburbia, and we can start now so that we're not kind of in that place where we've just continued to widen roads and induce car driving and induce congestion, because that's what widening roads does. And you told me you weren't going to let me say that again on this pod, and I just said it again.
Yeah, and I think, to me, the parts of the story that I found fascinating was, well, not fascinating, but just more true, is how little Fort Worth spends on transit compared to other largest cities. What this says here, while Trinity Metro, Fort Worth Metro Transit AG can tout a couple of hundred vehicles, including buses, and an impressive rail line from downtown to DFW Airport, its budget and capabilities pale when compared to similar cities. According to the 2024 budget of 5 most populated cities in Texas, we have, according to the data here, Trinity Metro spends $100 per capita compared to Dallas, which is $227 per capita, and Austin, which is $213. And so those kind of numbers there, and even just Kansas City is spending more per capita. Charlotte, all these other cities are spending more. And so I think that was the part that I found fascinating, but then why, back then we were moving in the streetcar space, and we were actually doing some things, but then the roads came kind of in the 40s and kind of really took
we
a toll.
had streetcars, and they were killed by roads, and then we revisited the streetcar, and that's what they're referring to also in this title, Who Killed the Streetcar, because we killed the streetcar that we originally had, then we had an opportunity to bring back streetcars in 2012, and we didn't do that, so it basically kind of killed the streetcar again. Yeah. So I think that this is setting us up to realize that we are in a time when we can make other decisions and move things forward in a better way. That is, it touches on
the 0.5%. Like, I think that's a big one too, how our 0.5% really just goes to operations and not really being able to fund or do anything around expanding our options.
I mean, as you said, you think this is one of the best articles you've ever read in Fort Worth Magazine. And I would tend to agree, because he doesn't just talk about like where we are now. He talks about the history of what got us here, the things that we have struggled with to this point when it comes to transportation and the funding of transportation. He touches on where that funding comes from, the struggle of whether or not any of the funding that other cities have that we don't have, like that other 0.5 cent, and whether that's available in Fort Worth, because it's not. I mean, we voted a few years back to tie that money up with our police department for the foreseeable future. And I think that department has basically kind of incorporated that funding into their basic budget. And so even if we were to free that half cent up at some point with a vote by the voters, the citizens of Fort Worth, they would need to find that money somewhere else in the budget. So it's a complicated issue, but I think that this kind of educates and informs everybody with how complicated it is and how other people are handling it and ways that we could tackle it in the future. And it gives a lot of information about the return on investment, the economic return on investment, what it is that young people are looking for when they want to live in a city, and the things that we say that we want to attract that, young entrepreneur to live in our city. And if we truly mean that, then these are some steps that we need to take in order to make our city have the resources and the amenities that those people are looking for, and the resources and amenities that young people that are here today will look for somewhere else if they can't find them here in Fort Worth.
We didn't have time to address like the mayor's city address that also happened, but like to me it's just like the language in Fort Worth. Fort Worth has city addresses and tons of conferences constantly talking about how great Fort Worth is, because you know who's not talking about Fort Worth? Everyone else. And so like this whole idea that Fort Worth is a suburb, I think what I loved about and appreciate about this article is that it's not just that we're operating as if we are a suburb. And I think like I like what you just said about the millennials age. He said here that there were less millennials and Gen Zers who are coming are less concerned with square footage and are more concerned with convenience. Thus, urban areas have grown by 13% since 2000. What is happening among young, well-educated professionals, those whom cities openly court and market themselves to make residents more comfortable in urban cities, is going to win rather than having the sprawl that we keep investing in.
Right. And as that was kind of the point that Chuck Marone from Strong Towns was making, that if we're gonna end up being like California, where we've gone down this 6-lane asphalt road and we continue that we're currently on for the next 20 years, that's where we're going to end up. He indicates that he's spent a lot of time in California and that there are things that California has been saying for decades, that it's growing, it's growing, it's growing, it's never going to stop growing. And so you're just depending on this continual, perpetual growth to fund things. And inevitably, that's going to catch up with you, and you're going to end up with these sprawling developments as far as the eye can see and a lack of ability to get around. And then all of that infrastructure is going to age out at the same time, and you don't have continued new growth to fund the maintenance of all of that sprawl that has been built. I will say, though, that there's going to be an opportunity to talk more about this this Fort Worth Magazine article, because the work that I'm doing at Community Design Fort Worth with transit and transportation, we're going to have a social gathering probably the third week of November to kind of talk about this article and the future of the committee that we're working with to kind of address and support and advocate for a multimodal transit system.
Yes, and I usually don't like making the article the story. I like to tell you what's in the article so you don't have to read the story. That's why we make this podcast, but I do recommend reading the story. We could have had this topic as the big story, because not only was the Fort Worth Magazine a big story, the Dallas Morning News on their October 23rd published a 24-minute timed, it says to read this, and it was an investigative story on the pileup of what happened in Fort Worth in 2021. So like the Fort Worth Magazine story is like, roads can't be the strategy, but if roads are continuing to be the strategy, the Dallas Morning News investigative report is saying then there needs to be a lot more accountability. 3 years after the crash, an exhaustive and exclusive review by the Dallas Morning News showed that the decision made that morning by the private toll operator, North Texas Express Mobility Partners, or NTE, contributed to the catastrophic crash. This is kind of the start of this long journey that Dallas Morning News has been making to see what happened on that day and what could have been done differently. So what their kind of data and this story reveals is a lack of general oversight by the Texas Department of Transportation of private toll operators, an issue that also was previously raised in a toll trap, the news' ongoing year-long investigation in the state's toll roads. Even more troubling, the National Transportation Safety Board issued 4 specific recommendations based on its investigation of the crash, but to date, 2 of those recommendations still have not been implemented. Dallas Morning News examined video, weather analysis, photography, civil lawsuits, and basically have a 1,400-page report by the National Transportation Safety Board. They reviewed. The news also poured over more than 100 additional crash reports from that day, crashing diagrams, photos, dash cam videos from Fort Worth Police and Fire Department obtained under the Texas Public Information Act. What you can see here is the news investigation report, along with the review of the NTSB report, reveals several troubling findings. And I'm going to kind of walk through them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 what they find. And I think then I'm going to pass it back to Ann to kind of get her take on this. Records obtained by Dallas Morning News showed that the company had circulated a draft winter maintenance plan prior to the crashes that spelled out how to properly treat roads during an ice and snow storm. However, the plan had not been implemented, nor was it required by TxDOT. NTE did not invest in basic technology used by industry more than a decade before the crash to monitor snow and ice. Instead, employees merely pumped their brakes to test for slippery road conditions and used $20 laser thermometers to assert air and roadway temperature, humidity, and other factors that contribute to black ice during the storm. Number 3, NTA made a decision to withhold additional manpower in the hours leading up to the crash, and the weather continued to deteriorate. Roughly 36 minutes after NTE night and shift supervisor activated an alert to set in motion a winter weather schedule that would trigger an all-hands-on-deck response from employees, she backed it down, according to court records. Number 4, an NTE maintenance manager with almost 10-year experience could not describe the proper method to lay salt brine on the road during inclement weather in interviews with federal investigators. Number 5, the news reporting found breaking down in communication and questionable decisions that led to poor monitoring of hazardous weather conditions ahead of the storm. One off-duty manager tasked with monitoring weather conditions did so by watching TV in bed. At least 2 NTE supervisors inspected the area but decided to leave the roadway untreated roughly 2 hours before the crash, a maintenance tech told federal investigators. Number 6, employees were either headed home after an overnight shift or reporting to work to start their shift when the chain reaction crash began, leaving the roadway with maintenance crews to patrol the crash site during critical moments of the crash, without maintenance oversight. Shift changes typically begin at 3 a.m. and last about 30 minutes. But oddly, a corporate decision was made just a day before to push back the shift change to 6 a.m., just as the crash happened. There was no explanation for the change. And finally, number 7, the toll road's design, an especially narrow shoulder enclosed by concrete barriers with few exit or entry ramps, leave little to escape a crash or road hazard even during perfect weather conditions. So, a lot has been exposed on how, no pun intended, we were asleep at the wheel on what it means to actually support people. People died this day. This is the largest crash in modern Fort Worth history when it comes to vehicles. We are talking about something that could have been prevented and that happened because we give our road responsibility to the private sector, and Texas likes to be proud that we have public-private partnerships. But just because private partnerships goes and grows your roads doesn't mean you allowed them to do it with very little foresight.
And you are asking me to chime in now, but you basically said everything that I was probably would have said. I mean, this literally was a 24-minute of crashing cars, SUVs, pickups, big rigs, and other vehicles slamming into the back of each other in a series of accidents on a 1,110-foot stretch of roadway that ultimately included 130 vehicles. And people can say, oh, but it was the ice and this is like a one-time thing. But your comment about road design, that's what jumps out to me. We are designing roadways to move people from A to B quickly. And I think this obsession with speed that we have is leading to people dying on our roadways. And, I've said it multiple times everywhere I've been talking about transportation and highways and roads that we have not had a death-free day on Texas roadways since November 7th of the year 2000.
And so when you look at this, right, like I think like to me, it's not like we just had a snow day as well. It's not like it just came out of nowhere and like we weren't prepared for the ice storm. We had days, probably closer to 10 days to really prepare. We know we were going to have some big weather in Fort Worth. And it's just the lack of effort. And like to me, the part that like really throws me off is just this whole part of like the technology piece. Like there's 10 years experience technology out there that other cities use. Yet we were not using it to monitor snow and ice. Like this idea of brake tests, like we just have employees driving by and just hitting their brakes a couple times and saying, yeah, this road is good. And then a $20 laser thermometers to assert air and roadway temperatures. Yeah, those are just things that, I mean, I see as like.
Well, and every time I'm on one of those managed lanes or those toll lanes that have those concrete barriers on either side, this goes through my mind all the time. Like, what happens if there's a crash in front of me? Because literally, I don't know how emergency vehicles get in there to get people out. And I don't know where you go if that happens right in front of you. So I just avoid them.
Yeah, and going.
It's not the money to me.
Yeah.
It's not. I know a lot of people don't like toll roads because they don't want to pay more to drive on roads. But to me, it's the safety factor. There's people who want to go really fast on those roads. And if they slow down for any reason, they're pissed because they paid to be on there and they think that they should be able to go fast.
And twice I going to the airport, not taking the toll road was faster because there was a crash on the toll road. And if you look at that toll road, it is like that one lane and it was just stuck. They had the fire truck on the other side of the road trying to get over to this toll road.
You were driving to the airport, EJ?
Yes.
I'm so disappointed.
I know. Hey, you know what? I am not perfect. Texas has built more toll roads than nearly all other states combined, 852 miles that could stretch across 13 eastern U.S. states, and has more toll road operations than any other, contributing to 128 facilities that set different roll rates and are governed by different safety standards. Here's how I look at this. I know there's people who love transportation whose main goal is multimodal, invest in rail, invest in other options. We got to quit being a road economy. But I also know I live in Texas, and I also know that there's people who like driving on the roads and with their big trucks or cars. But here's how I look at this, right? We expose Facebook for wanting to be obsessed with increasing user engagement. And what that created is polarizing news, false claims, radical ideologies being shown up, and danger to the mental well-being of society. And we are now having guidelines to monitor how people run their algorithms. And some of Facebook's own employees were the ones who expose all these lack of accountability or mindfulness on what's the consequence of that engagement and being obsessed with more usage. We don't have that articulate story in the transportation space, but I think what I would like us to start having is, okay, regardless if we want roads or not, I think everyone from the person who drives an electric car to the person who drives a monster truck, that these for-profit managers of roads should have higher accountability and measures of what they do to make sure we're safe on those roads.
And not just them. I think TxDOT and all the dots and the Federal Department of Transportation as well. And I think that you said that there's nobody having this conversation, but I work with weekly people who are advocates for safer roads that would disagree with that. Now, whether we have a loud enough voice and whether we're making impact, I think is still yet to be determined. And you mentioned that you are reading Megan Kemble's book, and that's definitely putting a spotlight on kind of how these decisions have been made for many, many years and how our highways have been built and what was the original intention of highways. It was to connect cities, not go through cities. And so I'm constantly aware of when I am on a highway and I'm going through like the part of I-30 that goes right next to downtown Fort Worth. There's a lot of stuff to look at right there. And you can easily get distracted. And there's a lot of roads that come together in kind of a mix master right there. And you cannot expect to continue to drive 70 miles an hour through something that complicated. But people expect to go that fast on highways, and so they drive at dangerous speeds. Now, is that individuals making choices, or have we designed our roads to signal that you should be able to go that fast? I think that a lot of times it is the design. We have wide open roads that want to be forgiving if someone makes a small mistake. And instead of encouraging people to slow down to safe speeds, it encourages people to drive at those unsafe speeds. And then when they have crashes at those unsafe speeds, people die.
Yep. And the book is City Limits, Infrastructure Inequality and the Future of America's Highways. April 2nd, 2024, it was published. I agree Megan is starting this conversation. I think the challenge is you can tell in Megan's writing or in most people's strategy, people want the home run. Oh, I want the rail. I want the whole thing. I think like it's like, and I think we can get quick bipartisan effort of based off what City Limits is trying to do, what that research in Dallas Morning News to make this a non-political issue.
You would think, but there are so many people in the Safe Streets initiatives that I've been working on for over a decade.
Yeah.
There are politicians that tell me, I'm sorry, Ann, but this is a partisan issue. And I'm like,
just making the roads. I can see how they might say that about public transportation and buses and all that.
Speed limits. They think speed limits are. They think restricting what people can do on their cell phones while driving is a partisan issue because it limits people's liberties.
Yeah.
So
this is kind of falling in the same, almost the Second Amendment, where we clearly have data that guns kill people, and we clearly see that roads and car crashes. Those are, honestly, as an American, outside of eating too much, those are our next two ways that we're most likely will die. Is guns and roads if you're a young person.
Yep.
So, but you're saying like even with that data in front of them, they're like,
it's partisan.
Yeah. Well, sorry about that.
We will keep fighting.
But please read City Limits, Infrastructure Inequality and the Future of America's Highway. I'm only 25% in, but already good. I've read, 10% of all deaths on roads happen in Texas. That's what she said. So pretty cool stuff. Let's move into short story number 3. This is kind of going to the next piece. How we design our cities, right, is a big piece of this. And so the other part is transportation is bigger of an issue with the sprawl and how houses are being done. So we have a conversation here that we want to address around housing affordability in Texas. I think here's one of the things that I think are a problem in our state. The state needs to build more homes, about 320,000 more by one estimate. And so to me, what you see is a lot of these developers, we need to do this fast. States are like, we need to do this fast. So they're out there building in nowhere's lands where it might be easier to do that. But then it creates the road issue and all the things we're saying. So they're so connected. But I know you, as someone who was on a zoning planning commission, city council, knows this well. I would love for you to kind of talk about this Texas Tribune article and other things you're seeing in this space.
Yeah, this was an excellent article that was shared with me by multiple people because they knew that it would be something I would be interested in. But it's how 11 Texas cities made housing unaffordable and what's being done to fix it. Texas desperately needs more and denser housing to keep up with the demand, but zoning restrictions get in the way. And the Texas Tribune did an in-depth analysis and found that our housing costs are at the highest level in decades. And one reason is because there is not enough housing. And as you pointed out, there's people building kind of sprawling single-family subdivisions out in the hinterlands, but that our very zoning that we have make it challenging and difficult to do kind of other types of housing that is attractive to a spectrum of people who are looking for various housing types. And as we mentioned in the story about people being attracted to cities that are mixed use and walkable, those prices are even higher because the inventory there is limited. And so those prices go up because there's more demand of people who want to live in those places. And there is opportunity to add housing to those places. But rules in major cities make it exceedingly difficult, according to the analysis. Developers can build standalone single-family homes, long having been the American ideal of home ownership nearly anywhere in Texas cities where housing is allowed. But cities largely forbid other kinds of housing like townhomes, duplexes, small apartment buildings from being built in those same areas. So this analysis found this, and So we're basically getting single family homes or larger apartment complexes, and we're not necessarily getting them in the best locations. So this feeds back to something that I've also talked about, and it might be getting down into the nerdy city planning stuff a little bit too much for people, but I think I have faith that our audience likes some of this stuff as well. But we have a comprehensive plan that hasn't been updated in 30 years. If you look at the map itself, there's a lot of yellow. And if you're a city planner, you know that yellow means low density single family housing. And in the past, that has been used almost as a placekeeper or a holding kind of thing for an area that maybe we are not ready to decide exactly what it's going to be. But because we never updated and we have all that yellow out there, then you have acre-sized lots of single-family homes, and somebody comes in and wants to put in something even just slightly denser than that. And the folks that are already there will be like, nope, that's going to bring down my property values. And they'll fight against it. And if the comprehensive plan shows it being yellow, then the staff report is going to reflect that. And it's going to maybe say, no, you can't build that denser housing there, even though policy-wise it might be a good idea. So the other types of housing that they're talking about in here is one has been termed missing middle housing, which is what I described with townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings. And we have older neighborhoods in the city of Fort Worth, talking about going back to what we used to have with streetcars. We can also go back to what we used to have in housing. And some of those streetcar neighborhoods have a mix of these types of places, and these are very desirable places, and there is not a lessening of property values in these places. When you have quality townhouses, quality condominiums, quality row houses, courthouses, and smaller apartment buildings mixed in with single family, those single family homes maintain their values as well. And you have a more robust mixed use neighborhood with the things that you need and the ability for a cross section of people to live. But zoning in Texas has kind of been exclusionary zoning, where we put our commercial here and our industrial here and our single family here and our multifamily there and have it all be separate. And most Texas cities require builders to put in a ton of parking when it comes to these things. And so these are all things that are in our kind of antiquated zoning regulations that are restricting our supply and making the continuation of building, the product that is kind of exacerbating the problem. And changing zoning is a challenging thing to do. And so I think what this article is basically coming down to is that all Texas cities need to take a look at their zoning and determine what it needs to be changed to in order to encourage the type of development that would alleviate this housing shortage and housing affordability issue that we have and help bring down those costs.
Another article that kind of hits on this cost piece is a Dallas Morning News article by Jose Luis Adriano. Rent expenses take up more than half of total income for 23% of Dallas households. So when you talk about this, like, we're talking about two things that we aspire for, right? People currently aspire for is these houses way out here that then creates more time of driving. And now you have this big expense of this house, you have this big expense of this car, and you're spending a lot more time not doing the thing you really want to do. And that is just really making existing and living in Texas actually not that enjoyable and affordable, not affordable as well. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development considers households to be cost burden when they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. We're currently at, if these homes pay more than 50%, they're severely cost burden based off of their analysis. And that is just like another big piece of how desperately we need this. And I just really wanted to acknowledge that data point that also came out in the Dallas Morning News.
They talk about the challenge and the difficulty of zoning reform. And, I acknowledge that that is true. But I think that if people are willing to sit down and look at case studies where this type of mixed income housing and mix of use type of housing and the amenities that are available in communities that are built in this way, what it actually looks like, and have an open mind to it and not just jump to the conclusion that if we open this up just this slightly little bit and allow that it's going to turn into, a high-rise apartment complex next to your single family home, because that's literally not what we're talking about doing here. So I think it's a fix. It's similar to the transportation thing, that if you're going to talk about bike lanes and transportation, that you're trying to make everybody get out of their cars. If you're going to talk about other types of housing, that you're trying to make everybody not live in a single family detached home in a curvilinear cul-de-sac neighborhood, but that's not the case. It's just having other options for people who would like those options.
So bridging both together, there's this Fort Worth staff request of $2.7 billion to fund roads, parks, and more in a 2026 bond program. That feels like a lot of money. What's your kind of, it's about to be 2025. We have the comprehensive plan. We have staff's request. We also have the messaging issue. Can you kind of talk about why this part is important and like what could this help and do in cities that are dealing with this language?
So we have an article from the Fort Worth Report called Fort Worth Staff Requests $2.7 billion to fund roads, parks, and more in the 2026 bond program, which basically ties in, like you said, to both questions about transportation in story number 2 and housing in story number 3. We're anticipating a 2026 bond election, and city staff has narrowed down their funding requirements and the key projects that they would like to see become reality in Fort Worth. It's $2.7 billion of things that they need, but our bond capacity is only $800 million. So we're definitely not going to get funding for all of the things that are on city staff's list. But what I found interesting was that the largest funding request comes from Transportation and Public Works Department, which is asking for $1.7 billion to fund projects such as through roads, neighborhood streets, and intersections. Then Parks and Rec come after that. But I think that high cost of all of that road infrastructure is kind of ties into what we've already talked about in transportation. And there is another request in here to allocate some money towards affordable housing, which is something that has never been done in a bond. And so that is something that I would encourage folks to support if they believe that there is an affordable housing crisis in our city, which I think we can all agree upon. But originally, I think the Neighborhood Services Department was asking for $100 million to be a part of the bond for that request, and they have come back with a whittled down to $40 million, which would be used in part for funding of affordable housing program. If approved, they would work towards including that in this bond program, and that would help support single-family housing that people could purchase, as well as housing for people who are experiencing homelessness, and put some funding towards the city's community land trust, which is another way to deliver affordable housing when the land itself is in a trust that then can keep the price at a lower price going forward, even if somebody else purchases it in the future.
Something that's really getting me about all of this is like we spent probably nearly 2 hours together right before this episode. Just like, man, how are we going to organize all this? And I think part of the issue, we took a week off. But number two, it's like, these are dense articles and dense conversations that I think are all worth their own episode if they were kind of rolled out in a different way. And I just find it fascinating. Like, I'm not saying it was done on purpose, or I'm not trying to create a conspiracy, but why was all of this posted and discussed right during like all the election news? And we have an election that's taking everyone's attention when these are like, I mean, this Dallas Morning News article that was on the front of their paper on Sunday, I mean, it took up multiple pages on the newspaper, but it's just, there's no room to talk about this NTE issue. And then the Fort Worth Magazine, I mean, Brian put so much work into this, but he dropped it October 30th, like right in the middle of early voting. And then,
well, that's a magazine, so hopefully that sticks around for a minute.
Yeah. And then, I mean, Texas Tribune does as much as it can. And so to me, it's like, and then Fort Worth Report, this one, all these 4 articles are like, man, I wish the election wasn't going on, so we could talk about this for a whole year.
Yeah, I think that, but, it's funny because you're saying, oh, why did this all get dropped right before an election? And my feeling is, wow, all of these news sources are doing a more robust job of trying to inform the public about things that
Yeah.
are important.
100%.
So
these are all great articles.
don't be discouraged that they all came out. And if we didn't go into enough detail describing them here so that you don't have to go read them yourselves in this episode, because I've had people say to me, I really like how EJ goes through the articles to the point where I don't have to go read the article myself.
Yeah.
And I think in this one we had, like you said, so many dense articles with so much information that we can't do it justice
Yeah.
in our summary. And so it's really important that folks take the time to click on the links in the show notes and get the full story.
Yeah, because and they all kind of go together, and it almost drives me crazy because then I really want to spend time here on just like the mayor's city address, and then like just like how Fort Worth talks about taxes and lowering taxes. It's just like
maybe during the election returns we can distract ourselves by reading these articles in detail and coming up with more in-depth thoughts on them instead of sitting there refreshing the results at the county.
Yeah, and that's just a tough part here because it's like I genuinely do appreciate all this reporting. The challenge is I don't appreciate how little time we have to change our narrative or perspective or language in Fort Worth and in Texas. And I think this election is even going to make that harder if it goes the way, obviously, you and I don't want it to go. So there's such a issue with that. And I listened to the mayor's city address and I'm just like, dang. I mean, it was it felt down, like it was just a true language based on like still stuck in the Fort Worth way perspective of talking about Fort Worth. That's ultimately to me what I saw as the challenge. And that's where like I will also put her address into this all, because what I really want us to examine here is I want you to read these dense stories, but then I want you to watch Mayor Matter's Parkey City address and say how much of it is like actually going to get to these things and people are going to see, mixed use, different types of affordable housing, transportation really getting done. I mean, she hits these things, but it's not in the lens of changing the perspective and the language in Texas. Texas has this big house issue. I've been to 2 weddings. I've been this last 3 weeks. I spent more time outside of Texas than in Texas. I've been in Philadelphia. I was at a Haitian wedding in Costa Rica with 100 Haitians and people from the Caribbean who lived in New York, California. I've been all over, and so I want, like, to me, it's just like when I tell them I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, or from Texas, the first thing they do is whip out their TikTok and show me the big houses you can buy in Texas. Like, oh, where's this at? Where's this at? And we just have a big issue on the full gap of Texas is the place where you buy this crazy, large dream affordable home that is opposite to like we're trying to sell to these Philadelphians where I was for a week. Oh, but now you get all this if you're in Texas where they're living in row homes and we're talking about, hey, we might need some row homes. And it's like there's just this like yin and yang that it's just such a big battle that needs more time to be discussed on what is healthy. And then Texas doesn't have any reason to stop because we can keep doing it as far as we want to.
It's funny because we bought our house in 1993 and we thought it was like a starter house. And it's 2,200 square feet. It's not a small house. But all of my friends lived in those houses you're describing. Yeah. Like the people we knew lived in those big houses in those gated communities that were a little further out from downtown. Yeah. And I thought that was like the ideal thing eventually too. But I don't think that anymore. I think that I don't know. Exactly
I call it, I don't know if this is appropriate. I call it real estate porn. Like it's hitting this fantasy that people think they want, but they just don't know all the consequences that come with that. So me at this wedding, I'm like, okay, let me get my Anzeta mode. I'm like, but you guys don't understand. This is 45 minutes from actual city. You guys don't want to eat at Applebee's and sit in the stoplights all the time. Like, and they're from New York, so they have the New York accent. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. What I'm like, yeah. So it's like these things are like they're just playing at your desires. It's like weddings. Like, I mean, right? When people want extravagant weddings, it's like data shows that people with more extravagant weddings are actually more likely to get divorced. It's like, I bet the data shows people who think they want the big house in the middle of hell nowhere are actually not as happy and connected to their city. So it's like, it's just such a battle of like, we're battling between consumerism and capitalism, and how, I mean, billions of dollars are being made by keeping culture that allows us to fund people's wealth from the roads they build, from the housing units they build out in the middle of nowhere. Giving us time for us to connect with each other it costs nothing and it's free. And so capitalists can't make money off of that, but they can make money off of us driving in our cars, listening to radical radio shows, and they can make money of us having to have high insurance and it doesn't even cover flood insurance. There's just a massive wealth scam on allowing us to exist like this in Texas.
And I think that's what Chuck Marone was pointing to at the end of that article in Fort Worth Magazine about the unsustainable growth, all depending on just new shiny things being built more and more and more and more without taking into consideration how is that going to be maintained.
And I think, like, how can we make this bipartisan, a la like the same way we do TikTok, right? Or phone bans right now, right? Like, I think conservatives and Republicans are open to the bipartisanship when it's not about, limiting my rights of freedom, but when you address an equal bad guy. Hey.
Dying on the road.
Yeah, dying on the road. These guys are monitoring the roads, checking their fantasy team in bed, fantasy football team, rather than actually getting out on the road and assessing if we need to have a fix it with black ice here. Can we all agree that we want to have these for-profit entities to have more accountability on how they manage roads? Like, I'm not asking you to slow. Okay,
I'm
asking
you to slow down.
I'm not asking in this situation. I'm not asking you to slow down. I'm just asking that if you're going to drive fast, shouldn't you feel insured that the people who gave you those roads are actually being held accountable to treat those roads correctly? There needs and I think we can get closer to that when we talk about 2026 and 2028, like those upcoming years. But I just wanted to start, like, how do we really start thinking about all of this together?
I think it's a willingness to have a conversation and not just immediately revert back to our side of the ring, or, whatever sports analogy you want to put it in, to have two separate teams that have to be diametrically opposed to each other. I think that that's where you start. And I think that some of the conversations that we've been having here in Fort Worth about future development and comprehensive planning and zoning reform and identifying who it is that would benefit from more affordable housing and a diverse housing stock, we can identify people that you care about and love that would be benefited by that, so that you can have a connection to how that would improve. Maybe you're not going to move into one of those, but your child or your grandchild wants to be able to live here.
Wrapping this up, Ann, we are an hour into this episode and we still haven't hit the big story, which is our reflections on the election results and early voting and what we can expect on election day and how we're going to manage our emotions regardless of what the results are. But as we put a bow on this, you and I just spoke an hour about something that I think most of this entire presidential campaign wasn't even discussed. No one is talking about transportation, housing, or these big important items. Instead, we're talking about the emotional stuff or the single voter stuff that gets people emotional and worked up. But the things you and I just talked about are true things that impact all of us. But because it's those things that, big capitalistic billion-dollar private companies make a money off, they don't want us to have the conversations on the things you and I discussed. They rather have us worked up, emotional about the petty stuff that this presidential election has had to be about. And so as we transition in, I think the true big story here is these are the conversations we should be having in this country and in Fort Worth, and we're not. But let's go ahead and move into the election. We just want to spend this time to talk about what we're seeing, how we're getting through, some of our assessments, what we think of possible winning in Texas, and then also the national. And we're just going to kind of navigate this. I told my wife the other day, if I'm at a 10 on my anxiety about this election, my end goal is to get to a 6 on the rest of the elections. I just don't want to feel like this every 4 years. I just want to feel like, okay, I have to be informed. I'm going to go vote, and I'm never going to really be stressed out again. But I feel like I'm exhausted because how into it I am and how important I think this election is. And this is why I also believe why this podcast, and I wanted to build it, was because I'm not trying to get people not to be Republicans. I'm just trying to get us away from this Trump era of society that has made us exhausted, fighting, drama. Like, I want to go to just normal Mitt Romney, Obama going against each other. That's all I want. And when people say they can't vote for either because Trump is creating all this energy, well, I'm like, then if you vote for Kamala, the energy stops. Like, and that's the part that like is really making this stressful for me. Is like, if he wins, it's just, I'm tired of like the anxiety that comes with Trump.
Yeah. I would say I'm tired of that anxiety as well. I want to be excited about who I am voting for and not anxiety ridden about the fear I have about the person who I'm voting against, quote unquote. I don't want to be voting against people. I want to be voting for people. And, you know, as I shared, I think on a previous pod, when the announcement came that Joe Biden wasn't going to be the candidate and Kamala Harris was going to be the candidate, I had positive feelings and excitement similar to the positive feelings and excitement I had when Obama ran for president. And and I think a lot of people did. And I feel like I was hoping that that could kind of continue. But what I think ended up happening was we all just get so, I don't even know what the word is. We get so triggered by people we know expressing support for someone that we just can't fathom how someone could continue to support this person. And instead of saying what we think is positive about the candidate that we are going to vote for, we get into trying to talk about how scary their candidate is. And I don't think the folks that are still continuing to support him, I don't know that I can convince them with anything I have to say.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I mean, this whole thing of the whole world is going to become socialist or this woke agenda
Marxist.
with these extremes. I don't see that happening with candidates that I support. That's not, I don't see that side being as extreme.
Yeah.
And if they are feeling that kind of fear and anxiety to the extent that I'm feeling it about their candidate, then I wish there was a way to talk about that.
Yeah.
But social media is definitely not the way to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because that's what I've been doing, is just scrolling around and being surprised and horrified at people that I know that are supporting him still.
Yeah. And so let's kind of go through, to me, this election is really going to tell me how much more work we have to do and how far away or how closer we are, because Tarrant County is voting, right? Tarrant County is outvoting Dallas when it comes to in-person early voters. We had 2,000 more early votes in person than Dallas County. That should be celebrated. That's awesome.
Yeah, they're bigger than we are.
Yeah. And what does that mean for us, right? It's like, what does that mean? Does that mean Mercy Culture Churches got people out? Or does it mean that people who've moved here and are more progressive, does it mean that there are Republicans behaving like Democrats because they want this guy out? So there's the Glenn Whitley era, the Nikki Haley, like, that's the part that I'm really nervous about from a local level.
Because not very many people are speaking up in that space.
Yeah.
We can hope that the ones that are reflect a broader group of people who just don't want to have targets put on them, because the folks that are in that extreme mega space attack and go
Yeah.
after people and call them names and say that they're not true Republicans. And so I think that there's some instance of just not wanting to have that target on their backs.
Yeah, and to me that's, I mean, I'm at the point here. I think this is a Dallas Morning News article. I'll make sure to confirm it, but I screenshotted it while I was reading it on the plane. It said about half of Republican registered voters. This is a Press Nork Center for Public Affairs Research poll, well, like a survey. About a half of Republicans registered voters have a quote, a great deal or quite a bit of trust that the vote will be accurately counted by their local election officials, and around 4 in 10 say the same about the vote count in their state, but only around a quarter have at least quite a bit of trust in the nationwide count. So it's like Republicans have trust in the election at their state level, but it seems to have issues at the national level. But still, that's a quarter. And to me, if I'm that quarter who really believes that my votes, which you should, are valid and our election systems are safe and trusted, that Republican, which I think is the Glenn Whitleys and the people who do say, once you start touting democracy is not real, I'm out. That's a big number. So, like, if people like to ask, what do you think happened? I actually believe Kamala Harris is going to do we're going to do really well. That is if you ask me to be what I think is going to happen, I think Kamala Harris wins and we win well. That Iowa poll that came out on Saturday, I think those are real legit base points. The way she walks, the way she talks, the way she moved on us. Like, I think there's a lot I believe in, and I'll talk more. How much money she's outraised in him. I mean, $1 billion. She's raised nearly $1 billion to his $600 million. It wasn't a little bit, guys. So there's really nothing for me that shows. Even when it comes to young voters. Yeah, is Trump getting more young voters? But a lot of them are still not reliable voters, where the young ones voting for Kamala. So to me, I believe we're going to be okay from a national perspective. When I say I'm nervous about what are Tarrant County's true colors we about to see. Because Tarrant County is voting. So what does that mean? And that is going to be the part that I'm nervous about.
We've had some leaders in Tarrant County who literally have stated publicly that their goal is to make Tarrant County inhospitable to the other party.
Yeah.
And they're working really hard at doing that. And I think that's what has caused some people that might have a different opinion than those folks to stay a little bit quieter, because they don't want that target, like I said, on them. Because we have talked about a story where some folks have stood up and publicly said, or at least written an email to their, party people and said, we need to not let this man continue to be the face of our party. But then when that email became public, they kind of were like, well, I didn't know that email was going to become public, and I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, and we're talking about Beau French, the Tarrant GOP guy, who recently had more, it made the Texas Tribune, talking about just using the R word, many different things about.
It's just, I don't even know what to think. I can't even find the words. I don't know how a man in his 50s can talk like that and think that that's okay. And he's a father.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And to me, again, any other like this, like I am upset at every Republican that did not endorse Kamala Harris. If Trump wins, it is on every single one of you who didn't have the courage to step up, even though and I know that you didn't vote for him, because you care about democracy at least a little bit. And I'm tired of people moving small because they're afraid of risk. When this, like, you guys, I am disappointed in our local officials who don't stand up to Beau French. If you can mark my words, if a Democratic GOP member or leader acted that way, I'm imagining you would stand up and say, this is inappropriate.
Yeah. If a Democrat leader somebody leading the Democratic Party acted the way this man is acting, I would definitely speak up and say, this man does not speak for me, or this woman does not speak for
And
me.
needs to step down and doesn't
Yes,
deserve to be
exactly.
a representative of our large county. So yeah, you're on to bring that up. I mean, that's another great example of a news story that became, I think, your loss this episode, but would have taken space if we had more time and it wasn't an election. But how are you feeling? Do you feel?
Well, I told you before that I looked at my watch the other day and it told me that I had gotten my sleep goal for 10 times in the last 2 weeks, and I was feeling really good about that. And then I went to bed last night and woke up, boom, 2 a.m, could not go back to sleep. And I was awake from 2 until 3:30. And I was listening to podcasts that were predicting and talking about the swing states and talking about what analysts were going to keep an eye on to see which way things were going as returns come in on the 5th. And I was having kind of flashbacks to 2016 when my birthday was actually election day. And I was staying up and watching things and then deciding whether to go to sleep or stay up and watch. And so I still haven't decided what I'm going to do on the 5th. But I go back and forth. Like, there are places and conversations that put me in a calmer space where I think that it's all going to work out. And then there's things that flare up that make me wonder I don't think you can go by polls anymore. I think that the whole thing with how they used to poll with landlines, and then now younger voters who are probably, only on TikTok.
Yeah.
Like, how do you reach them and find out what they're doing? I did listen to a podcast the other day, The Run Up, which is one of the New York Times podcasts that's been following the elections and things about the elections for years. And they went and interviewed a bunch of the young male kind of bro frat boys that apparently Trump is trying to woo. And then they interviewed a bunch of young women, and they were talking about the divide in the genders, with young males becoming more conservative and young females becoming more progressive, and whether that was affecting dating and all those things. And I started to get really worked up because it seemed to be like a whole bunch of young frat boy bros talking about how much they like Trump and how this toxic masculinity is something that they like, calling men that are supportive of LGBTQ people, names, and saying really negative, disparaging things about them. And I got really discouraged by that. But then when they were interviewing the young women, all of them had early voted. And so I was like, okay, these guys are talking a big talk, but I don't know if they are going to make it to the polls, or if they clearly haven't yet. They didn't early vote. And are they going to make it to the polls on election day, or are they just talking?
Yeah.
Like, people just, get real brave on social media to say stuff and don't take action. So I don't know. Right now, I don't even know. I can't even tell you right now if I feel like things are going to be okay or if things are going to go awry.
And again, if Trump wins like in flying colors, or like, he does better than he did 2020, I'm just going to have to assess my reality as a person at the end of the day. Like, how little I have become an elite person who sits in this corner who really doesn't understand normal people anymore in America. And I need to figure out how to fix that. Like, that would be my real, like, I will be really sad internally on, like, man, my judgment and perspective is so off on what it means to be understanding the American people. So, like, that will be something I just have to work on.
Yeah. And
But
I think all this conversation about reproductive rights and whether that's left to the states or not, you were traveling recently and talked about the energy and what you were observing in other places. I have family members that live in other states. And so sometimes I feel like we're sitting here in Texas surrounded by kind of one mentality that maybe isn't as widespread in other places. But I don't want to be I don't want the United States to be so fractured and divided up that, everything is red and blue and you have to move to another state if it becomes so inhospitable to you because the leadership, that's their goal, is to like drive you out. I don't like that mentality of, I'm here now, build a wall, don't let anybody else in. I don't know. This is going off on another tangent a little bit, but
yeah, and that's yeah, I think that's what we're going to have to be able to see. I do want to hit some of the numbers that are in. We're going to have some of these articles here. Looking at early voting again, like we said, we are down 825,000 votes from 2020. So we need to really see what this Tuesday will look like. I think the battle of low voter turnout, like it's confusing because at the same time we're actually seeing studies show that there are more Republicans than Americans than Democrats, and they're like, actually now the story is that Democrats think that getting more people out means more Democrats will win. I'm wondering, like, could lower voter actually be good for the Democrats, because that's a lot of people sitting at home because they can't bring themselves to vote for a Democrat, but they know they can't bring themselves to vote for Trump either. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be interesting. What's also showing, looking at the county data, you have lower turnout, which is common in these Latino areas like El Paso County. Low turnout. I mean, they were in like the 36%, where we were over 50%, and their voter turnout. So like that's another thing I'm going to be watching, is like, what do the Latino voters actually see or don't see? But what we clearly see is no one's really speaking to them clearly enough to get them excited. Because if we're looking at Hidalgo, 36.8% of cumulative percentage early voting, compared to El Paso, another one, 34.97. But like, here's what really scares me. And here's what really scares me is that Tarrant, over 50%, we're purple. Collin County, which is, if Tarrant's purple, Collin County is seen to be in 2020 the red capital 6, county. 58% of them early voted in Collin County. That's the largest that I see here of all the counties. The next one is Denton County. So if Tarrant, Denton, and Collin has the highest numbers in Harris, Dallas, in order for us to go blue, Harris and Dallas is going to have to break its historical day of election. And like we always talk about, Democrats vote early. So I don't know if Texas, it'd be interesting to look at this early voting data compared to all these other states. We didn't have time to do that, obviously. But it could be another argument where Texas is just getting more red, but it's not necessarily a reflection of all of America. Those are going to be things we're going to have to see as well.
Yeah, I think I've listened to a couple of podcasts that talk about reaching Latino voters. And one of them was a Republican strategist talking on what both parties get wrong when it comes to Latino voters. And it basically, that whole idea, and I think this has been said multiple times, that Latinos are not a monolith. Like, they don't all vote the same. They don't all believe the same things. And so that was a podcast called Imperfect Paradise that I've found to be very informative.
What I could tell you by being in Philadelphia, which was really great. I mean, Pennsylvania is the most important state. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, she has a 93% chance of becoming president. So Pennsylvania is crucial. And while I was in Pennsylvania, you couldn't count to 3 without seeing something about voting, like seconds.
Well, that's what Jim was in Arizona for a soccer tournament, and he was like, "Ann, you wouldn't believe the ads here."
Yeah.
Because these are swing states.
Yeah,
so they're trying hard.
And what I can tell you where Kamala was rocking is I'd saw no ground game from the Trump game. There was no one out knocking on doors, where Kamala, I saw every day a canvasser, if not one or two, walking around knocking on doors, pitting up
dropping literature.
Yeah, dropping literature. So, and a lot of people say that ground game. Also, I got to see my grandparents. You know, my background is Puerto Rican, so all my family's from Puerto Rican, and so I got to sit, and there was a lot, like that whole Puerto Rico incident. I mean, you got 600,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania. You got 65,000 in Wisconsin. You got 1.1 million in Florida, over 100,000 in North Carolina. And there was the amount of that was really exciting to see because my family lives in a Puerto Rican community. But I also sat there with my 88-year-old grandpa, my 85-year-old grandma, and then my godfather, my uncle who's 55, and then my aunt who's 65. I'm sitting there and we're talking about the election. My grandpa is he's a hot mess that, you know, I'm surprised I'm glad to see that he's still here because he's just all over the place. But he loves Trump. But he loves Trump in the sense of he just thinks he's a guy that says what's on his mind. But is he voting? No. My grandma has never voted, and will still not vote. I try to say, imagine voting for the first woman, like your first election as an 85-year-old lady is to vote for a woman. Now my 65-year-old aunt, she's a nurse, progressive, already early voted. She was ready to go. Already voted. My uncle, I would say a moderate conservative, meaning he said, I'm not voting because I can't vote for the abortion stuff is his anchor. He also has his views on gender identity on that stuff. But then he also can't vote for Trump because of all that stuff. So I sat in that room and saying, dang, okay, if the only person who voted in this room is what you say, going back to the female who early voted, I think that felt like the sign of
Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, because in a sense of like you're going to see lower voter turnout because people are sitting at home
Perplexed.
more. Yeah, perplexed. Yeah, that's a great word, perplexed. There's a lot of perplexedness in this one. And because, got to remember, Kamala came fast to a lot of people. So now they're like, man, what's going, So, but at the end of the day, you see who's kind of voting. So those were just kind of things I saw there. And
I think one thing that I did see that drove me absolutely nuts was interviews with people who basically thought she couldn't do a good job because she's a woman.
Child.
That I just was wanting to scream through the podcast speaker or at the person being interviewed on TV or whatever, because there was multiple times when I saw men saying that they had concerns about the safety of our country going forward because, how would she handle herself? Have we ever had a woman president? No, we have not. Oh, my goodness. There's been women leaders in other countries.
Yeah.
Who've been very strong leaders.
Yeah.
So, and I watched a Frontline documentary type of news story that chronicled Trump from early years as a child and his upbringing, and Kamala from early years and her upbringing, all the way through all the jobs that they've had, all the things. They talked both positively and negatively about things that have been challenging to them over the years. And that really helped me know more about Kamala as well. And so that helped me with my reasons for why I'm voting for a person and not just against another person.
Yeah. Well, we hope you guys can find peace and time in all of this time and maybe spend less time thinking about this stuff.
But if you haven't voted, definitely vote.
Yeah. Please do so. And take someone with you. We're going to move into wins and losses. Let's try to make this quick. So let's go ahead and dive in. Every week we do this. We start with our losses. We end with a win. I'm going to make mine really quick. Mine was, I saw an article where Trophy Club is trying to become a Texas Town of Patriots designation from legislators. That during an October 14th meeting, the town council adopted a resolution that will be introducing the next legislative session to designate Trophy Club as a Texas Town of Patriots. Mayor Janine Tiffany, who helped lead the effort, said during the October 14th council meeting that the infusion over time of patriotism in Trophy Club has persisted. The reason the resolution pays homage to everyone who has championed patriotism in Trophy Club. This town started as a retiree town for a golf retreat. Now has over 14,000 people. It has insane mansions. Again, I think I have no problem with being patriots in the sense of like being a proud American. But again, this word has a lot of issues right now. We don't have anyone coming out Austin's night trying to get a city, the wokest city in America, right? Because it's not a good word right now. So to me, the loss here is that this is what I think Fort Worth does with Cowtown. You can't sell Republicanism, but you can sell Cowtown. Trophy Club thinks they can sell the greatest city for patriots and not think we don't know what that means. So that's my loss there.
It's funny because I worked for the town of Trophy Club back in the early 90s when I was still finishing up grad school. And after I graduated, they hired us as a consulting firm to be their town planners, basically. And it was a planned community that had a whole plan around the golf course, like you said, but it was planned to have single family, medium density, missing middle housing, and multifamily and commercial. And they built all that single family first. And then for like 10 years, the first residents of that community were strong NIMBYs who fought everything else that was in the plan, even though it was all in the plan.
Yeah.
And they fought even the commercial until they realized what a pain in the ass it was to drive for everything that they needed and have to get on 114 to drive out of their community to get every single thing that they needed. So slowly over time, some of that development has occurred, but it was very interesting to be the town planners for Trophy Club. I also had a woman there tell me that she was told that the water tower that was behind her house was going to be removed and relocated when she bought her house, which was definitely not an accurate statement.
Yep. My win is our announcement of the 817 Gather. I mean, we're already really can't invite that many more people for the first one because we have enough people interested in hanging out with us. And I'm sure we're going to talk about post-elections when we're all together at the 817 Gather, our first in-person experience to just build a third space for people like us who are just trying to figure out how to live in Tarrant County. And, we could be celebrating that Tarrant County is more, has similar views as us who listen to the pod, or we might be sweating bullets because we realize we live in a county that doesn't have views like us. But I'm excited. My win is that. And we're going to be sending out information to everyone who applied to the 817 Gather to come to the first one. We're going to be sending you guys locations and times this week and next with more details. So thank you for everyone who showed interest. That was fun.
Yeah. So my loss, I'm just going to brush over it very quickly because I've already said it so many times, is this whole situation with the head of the GOP in Tarrant County and how people in that party are not speaking up and making it clear that it's not okay that someone who speaks like him and carries himself that way is the head of their party. So that's it for my loss.
And 48.5% of people will still vote in that party. Just how crazy is it?
But my win is not what I said I was going to have it be before, because it was also flashing back to the articles where we talked about transit and all that. But my win is an article in the Fort Worth Report titled "Documenters, Fort Worth Wants Your Input on Mobility, Transit, and Transit Options." So it does touch on transit a little bit, but what I'm really more calling out as a win is that the Fort Worth Report is starting a program called Documenters. It will officially launch in 2025, but the program will train and pay residents to document local government meetings with notes and live tweets. And they have a link in this article where you can sign up to be a documenter. And I think this will just add to that thing that I pointed out before where I said it seems like more journalism is happening, more reporting on things is happening, more accountability is happening, more opportunity to be aware of the things that are going on in your community are happening. And the Fort Worth Report would like you to help them do that even better.
Awesome. That sounds great. Community, civic journalism, all about. All right, beautiful people. This was a long, extensive, all over the place, I can admit, episode. A lot going on. And such an important time for our country, our county, and city. We look forward to seeing you on the next one and being a committed listener to the 817 podcast.
Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us like double tap.